Today's talk on how to build a team and how to make product market fit. I'll talk about a little bit myself. I'm Wolfson 84, Department of Engineering. And this is the last in a series of 4 talks in coincident with the Wolfson College Entrepreneurship Competition. And my understanding is we've had like over 30 entrants for that competition. So if anybody's here in that series of applications, that's great. There'll be a set of judging on the next steps. I'm president of R42. I'm a fellow at Stanford University. R42 is a venture fund. We have about 60 investments in what I call tough tech. Usually it's biotech, artificial intelligence, work with a number of universities. We have a summer fellows program where we put fellows on a AI project and we put them through an AI course. We also have opportunities for mentors and also a co-founders program where you can incubate an idea. That's more of a longer term process. So you can go to the r42group.com website to have a look at that. Who am I? I'm a serial entrepreneur, sold 3 companies, 1 to Motorola, 1 to BlackBerry, 1 to Apple. That was with Blaze Thompson, a Wolfson College graduate. I was more the advisor, investor in that one, medals and things like that. I'm a fellow at Stanford University, where in the Center for the Study of Language and Information. And I'm involved in a project looking at intelligence in humans, animals, and machines. This is really for the next few decades as we see advances in biotechnology and machine intelligence. So we'll just review, how to build a team because many of you may need to add team members, or you might need to figure out how to fill in gaps in an existing team. And you can think of the team not just as the team that actually is in the company, as in the actual company that's actually building the product, but your extended team. These could be an advisory board. Often the founding team is a set of founders. There's often a distinction of when is your first employee a first employee versus when is the first employee a founder. Often the founders are taking more risk. They're giving up their jobs. They're working with no salary to start the companies. And then we have the extended team. These are partners to help the company. It could be suppliers. It could be attorneys. It could be bankers. It could be accountants to actually get the team on a solid footing. So why would anyone want to join a startup? Because half of the startups don't make it. They're not there after 5 years time. Usually the money is less at the beginning, at least. And sometimes you'd say, well, no, why I should work for Google instead. I can get much more limelight. But that's not always the case, particularly for very high-risk topics. Often you find the startup will have more people, even once they get to like 10 people. They'll have more people working on that topic than a big multinational is if it's a really emerging area. And so this is like a high risk, high reward. You can actually get, what you're working for is the stock. If it's for financial reasons, often it's for non-financial reasons. You physically might not be able to work on this topic in corporate land. Because it's so advanced, so leading edge that actually the corporations are not actually working on it. So it might be your only opportunity. So there are many reasons why people might want to work, and also people want to work with potentially their co-founders, people they've worked before, and that attracts them to work on things. As I said, you can't get the limelight as much as if you work in corporate, in a corporation, corporate America, corporate Britain. This is me from like 30 years ago. And at this point, this company was only 3 people. And we were working on cursive handwriting recognition. And eventually this got bought by Motorola. And so a candidate that's coming onto a team can think about, this is really a chance to become in the limelight and part of a billion-dollar company. And it's the chance to work on much more interesting topics than maybe the one works at, particularly at a young age where you may be a cog in a large corporation. Also, you might have a higher position. It'd be, you might join a engineering corporation, and it'll be, you might be coming in as software engineer or something, or even senior software engineer. If you join a small company, you might be a vice president, quote unquote, vice president of engineering or vice president of marketing, and this is often the quickest way to get to a high position in a large company is actually through being acquired as a small company, because you can skip many years of career progression. How many co-founders do you need? You usually need, I think usually one investors think is a bit of a risk. 3 is a bit, is probably on the outside. I've seen teams of 4 or 5. Usually team risk is one of the biggest risks. Often people don't work out later on, even though they're best of friends at the beginning. 2 co-founders, it's a little bit less stress. Often you want a complementary skill set. Often if you've worked together somehow, some in some other context, it's great. If you can sort of be frank and candid with each other, that's great. One of the things that is quite important is start vesting quite early. You might think, why do I want to start vesting? Vesting means you don't own 50-50 day one. You build up to 50-50 over a period of 4 years. And you might say, why do I want to do that? Because, shouldn't we just have all as much? It's because you might actually, if things don't work out, then there's a predetermined formula of how, kind of like a prenuptial, if you like, of how things are split between you. So, if someone starts and leaves in 3 months, then then you may have like a 1-year cliff. Maybe that person doesn't get anything. If it leaves in 1 year, and then the other person has to continue for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, you can have there's a formula of how things get split between the founders. The team does need multiple components depending on the kind of company. This is more for a device team or an engineering team. For biotech, it's kind of different. But typically, you have these functions, and these functions could be in one person. They don't have to be different individuals, but an investor or a customer needs to see these functions. So often sales and marketing is combined. You often finance can usually be delayed. Often it's a bookkeeper, and there's a mini industry of accounting companies, and that will help you create the books. Depending on where you're located, I find UK companies often have a chairman. That's not very common in US companies or companies around the world. That's a particular British kind of thing. That's usually a more seasoned business person who would actually sort of ensure there's enough structure. There's also ensure that things are filed with Companies House in the UK. Biotech companies are a little bit different. Often things are heavily outsourced. Usually it's an idea from a university. Often you'll have a chief scientific officer, medical officer, and then maybe a regulatory officer. Often these might be outsourced, and this could be in the company itself, or often I've seen people in an advisory board. And the advisory board is much more common in biotech companies. You can have them in tech companies as well. Usually these are people you don't have to pay as such, because they're not showing up every day, but rather a customer needs to know that they are on the team and available. In biotech companies, advisory boards are usually reputable people in academia. You have this concept of key opinion leaders, KOLs, where people are an expert in a particular topic and they're willing to put their name behind you. Often this is very, very common in tech companies. If you're building a new phone or something like that, that's less common. Employees, there's always this thing, and how can how many should you hire as quickly as possible is usually, as much as you can afford. And then usually when you're early, you can actually be a bit more quirky in your interview process. You can actually ask them to write a bit of code or solve a problem that's relevant to your problem. It's best to also, at a fairly early stage, design an onboarding process, even if it's simply to say, well, here's your employment agreement, here's your IP agreement, here's what it means. This will be an exit interview if you ever do exit. When you're early, you can have all your team members interview potential applicants. How much stock to give each person? Of course, we know there's only 100% in the pie, and that's got to be split between advisory board members, investors, and the founders and the employees. Usually there's a 10 to 20% employee pool. Usually the first round of financing will take 20% of the company. Interestingly enough, that's independent of whether you're raising $200,000 or $2 million. And then often you'll have like 60% split between 2 or 3 founders, advisors, usually 0.25%, 1% each. Things you want to outsource: accountants, advisors. We talked about admins, certainly legal advisors. Often you'll do web designers, content writers, depending what kind of company you are. Certainly payroll. There's a whole mini industry of online resources to file the taxes and file the payroll amounts that you can do. These are things that you should not have in-house, which is why you can actually outsource bookkeeping and the like to others. Others being certainly lawyers and accountants. It's best to get them on board fairly early, depending on where you are. Often they'll work for free as free advice until something happens. If something happens, meaning you get a customer, you get investment. They're also accelerators. Universities, being part of an alumni group is great. And of course, your family. Right, so that's how you get a team. Next, we need to build a product. And there's this concept known as product market fit. What does that mean? Venture capitalists are always looking for product market fit, because it's often the case that a company's making a solution for a problem that doesn't exist yet. So we say, well, when we make a solution, does it actually fit with what the market wants? And many of you may have known this process known as the lean startup process, where we have an idea and we build the most minimal implementation of that idea. It might only be a PowerPoint slide or a storyboard, and we code it up and try to show it to someone. You might not even code it up, might be just a set of drawings. And then you get some feedback from the potential user of what they like about it, what they don't like about it, and then reiterate on your idea and then rebuild the prototype until you get to something that's closer to what you think about. Often this process involves interviewing like 100 potential entities, users, or partners. And for AI products, it may be a little bit different, because you need to actually often get data to actually create a model, create a prediction of whatever you're trying to predict. In the field I was in, speech recognition or handwriting recognition, you have to collect physical amounts of quantities of data to get a minimum accuracy to decide that to actually show to anyone that whether they'd actually use it or not. And so in a lean AI startup, often an engineering process, we're collecting and training a model, and then we're testing it in real life. We're doing these things seriously. The right way in an actual product development mode. On the left-hand side, we see more of an academic process. On the right-hand side, we're more of a real-world process where we started actually from day one. even before we've even created the system. So, well, let's say, suppose it worked. Would anyone use it or not use it? Part of asking that question. And maybe we're solving the wrong problem. And so you need to be sort of iterating with users all the time. And so iteration is not an unknown process. The Apollo program you can look at and arguably had like 35 minimum viable products, MVPs. And this is why it went from Apollo 5 all the way to Apollo 11 to Apollo 17. Lots of mini problems, starting from Project Mercury to get to the actual man on the moon. We have data. As we get data from our products, particularly in these machine learning products, it gets smarter and smarter as we get more data from the user. And so as you get further along, you're building up an asset in the company. And as you become entrenched, you actually become more and more accomplished in the actual topic you're trying to look at. This is a business model canvas that all of you, I think, if you are entering the competition, will be asked to make. This is a classic academic framework to actually put in what is your value proposition, who are your customers, what are your costs to actually set up. For some different types of products, you can look at biotech and AI, you might have to add in other components, like where are you going to get your data from? Where are you going to run your infrastructure, and what are the ethical risks, for example, of your product? So as you're building the product, really you've got to figure out what is the cost benefit analysis. What features does the product need to have? And this is a trade-off between what features you want it to have versus the effort to actually implement those features. So there's a number of frameworks to actually create, and I can do a whole course on this. I teach a whole course on this at Stanford University, which basically says, let's look at how to prioritize the features. And there's a temptation to work on our pet projects we just like, right? We just like doing cool stuff, particularly us engineers, and I'm the first person to blame myself for doing it, to work on ideas that are clever instead of actually ideas that can actually have sustainability, can then fund themselves project after project. And so the process is this is often a process known as design thinking, trying to figure out what the customer wants, how it will satisfy the customer, and the relationship between the house, right? What is we may have several things on how we're solving the characteristics, that the requirements of the customer. How do they relate with each other? We want it to be light. We might want a product be light and portable and pocketable, but we also want it to be functional. That tends to mean it's actually mean that it might need to be heavier. And so those are contradictory requirements. And so the classic process is developing feature ratings, evaluating these ratings against these products, and figuring out how to actually implement them. And there's a number of frameworks, and I'm just going to go through a few frameworks out there that you can look at. Some are more complex than others. First one is the House of Quality. This comes from the quality literature, which is feeding in the requirements from customers, feeding in the competitive benchmarks, the technical requirements, and it can become quite complicated. So you've got sort of features on the left here, you've got competitors on the right here, and then you've got actually the technical embodiments to deploy those features. And then you've got to put sort of pluses and minuses, some things which actually resonate with each other, and some things which are opposite to each other, to try and actually get through. And then you sort of weight the importance accordingly based on these things. This has been quite complicated. Car companies have been using this for decades to build cars. A more simpler concept is to simply plot your features and say, well, how much effort is it going to take for me to do, and how valuable is it going to be for my product, and just simply plot them. And then you say, well, let's start off with these top left-hand quadrants first, and not pay as much attention to the bottom right-hand quadrants. There's a number of frameworks out there in actual trying to weight these scorings, what things are more important than others. So clearly, we might want to increase revenue, increase value, maybe strategic value, maybe a little bit less. You can weight them accordingly. What's the risk of actually implementing these things? Calculating the weights accordingly will have different things. So going through whatever your product is, whatever your function is, saying, okay, well, what's the most important functions and how should I weight them? And then figure out what, in this case, it's just trying to create a report for a organization. What's the most important thing? This is the Kano model, again, which talks about excitement features and features you just got to have just to be considered in the market, and plotting your features along these lines and saying that you want things that are satisfiers, but you also want to avoid dissatisfiers as well, and how much time it takes you to actually make you create these things. Creating a table, like I said, trying to come up with a framework. These are all sort of variations that you can actually come up with. Another concept is, you give your user, £1,000 and say, okay, you've got £1,000 and spend it on the set of features that you want to have. What's the most important, to try and get an idea of what they want to have in their product. Finally, is this RICE model, which I quite like. RICE is reach, impact, confidence of the idea of the impact, and effort required. And you can have like a number for each of these components, and you just simply put them in a spreadsheet and put them in a formula. So reach multiplied by impact multiplied by confidence divided by the effort, and then you work out which features or projects you have that have the highest RICE scores and just do those. Okay, I will stop there and let's open for questions if we have any. Right, great. From Rachel here. What are good ways of finding team members outside of the university environment? Well, it depends on the environment. Certainly if you're in Cambridge, it's a very close-knit place. Britain is a very close-knit area. Often is telling people that you actually exist. There's so many meetup groups. There's meetup.com, which is a site. There's so many talks, so many events happening in London, certainly in Silicon Valley. You might have to go to London to see more of those. Right now, a lot of things are online. And Woody Allen once said 99% of life is just showing up. You don't even have to be clever. Just show up to things. And I think you can be find a number of people. So being sort of varied, sometimes getting a little bit of PR fairly early on, even on an idea, sometimes might be worth doing. There's, it depends whether you want to be, how stealth you want to be. But at some point you have to sort of put things. I know one friend of mine, quite a well-known company in Cambridge right now, put an advertisement for a co-founder on Craigslist and actually found someone. So I think not being too proud and using your normal mechanisms would be a way. Yes. How to find and convince advisory board members to join if you're at fairly early stages? What are their different incentives for joining? It's kind of interesting. Some advisory board members, often you're asking them to join when it's a for almost being a friend in a way. You're not giving them stock or anything like that, and so it's something they want to be involved. They want to be involved with the idea, with the project. Often, sometimes they say, well, I might want to work for the company, but let me start off gently as an advisory board member and see what it's like and see what you're like and see what the product's like. Others might want to say, well, they view it as a portfolio effect, because usually advisory board members get a little bit of stock, 0.25% here, 0.25% there. if they're an advisory board member for 5-10 companies, they're building up their own little portfolio. So it's not for free. You should think of yourself that you're actually giving them something, the opportunity to participate. Others want to be part of a network of other clever people. Often they'll say, well, who else is on the advisory board? Well, I like to get to know him or her as well. And so they will be interested in that. So the different incentives for different people. So we're coming up to the end now. So I think this is the last question. Anything else? Great. Okay. Thank you very much for attending these quick, short talks. And we look forward to seeing people in the competition.